Good afternoon from my time zone. The University of Little Rock for Medical Sciences is a very large, we have a very large multiple myeloma and leukemia study center. The original director who formed the multiple myeloma unit insisted on a 24-hour turnaround time for all bone marrows done in the clinic or for future patients coming in. The problem that we looked at was that's pretty quick turnaround for bone marrow, and to do them correctly. The person writing the original protocol for this was not involved in histology, was only in the gross room between 2004 and 2008, and they wrote most of the protocols from what they read online or in books and did not understand what the differences in decal solutions were, processing reagents, what processing reagents could do to a bone marrow core, or what it could do to subsequent staining. The result had been a mixture of cores that could be good, bad, ugly, and then very ugly. And some of them really were, because they were just kind of doing everything by just by guess, to be honest. So after that, I came in. I came here 6 years ago as the supervisor. At that time, actually the AP manager, and then switched to supervisor. And I was shocked when I found out we had 24-hour turnaround time, and I looked at the protocols because they weren't really what we needed to be doing. And things had changed fairly drastic between 2004 and 2008 as far as being able to have to do not just an H&E and a PAS with a few CD markers. Now we were looking at the same basic stains along with kappa, lambda, CD markers, molecular, flowing into next gen, and no one had looked at changing the protocol. And with these things changing so quickly, you really have to look at it. We're now changing our decalcification solutions from an HCl-based to a formic acid-based solution. We had a previous director who really figured if it was working, there was no point in changing it. And even using HCl, couldn't understand why he got beautiful kappa lambda until it was carefully explained to him. We have now changed again, and things are getting better. Formic is also recommended by antibody and probe companies, as well as an improvement to the general stain. We're currently awaiting funds at the moment to complete the transition by early next year. And yes, like all academics, or like hospitals and businesses, it runs on funds available, and somehow we never have funds available when we need them. 6 years ago to now, over the last 6 years, we have made adjustments in fixation time and processing time. The first changes are the clearing agents, which we have now unfortunately changed back to xylene only, and I'll explain that in a second. We started to look at fixation times after questions for improvements in decal were requested by our hematopathologist. This improved the post-fixation of the bone marrows after a log water rinse to take away the decal. We were looking at the decal solutions to improve both decal and staining. We're changing from Surgipath Decal 2, which is an HCl EDTA, to a formic acid-based solution. HCl is just too tough on many of the things we're looking at. And the EDTA, if it's above pH 7, really doesn't affect what you're doing. It's no longer doing anything in the solution other than being there. So we have to get away from that. This is an excellent decal, by the way, for other things, just not what we're doing. The formic acid decal is, as I said, recommended, even for chromogenic and CD markers, and it should improve everything. We keep testing and moving forward as the literature in the field evolves, and now we are allowed to do that, which is a very good thing. When we were having issues with the staining for IHC and supposed to be in situ, kappa lambda staining, and I have a little thing there. We're working to varied times for the formalin to hold on the processor. It was very interesting because we temporarily had a night shift when the bone marrow processing starts at 7 p.m. and they were ending at 1:30 a.m. in the morning for embedding and cutting. This was when the problem started, as the heme path doctors noticed the stains were different and wanted more fixation as a way to improve the staining. We had taken a step back for fixation, it seemed. Prior to the night shift, we had been using the load time of 7 p.m. and ending at 4 a.m., so there was a big fixation difference there. When we load at 7 p.m., the cores are held in formalin until approximately 1 a.m., and then the processing program takes over to end. Now we come in at 5, to end at 5 a.m. It was finally decided that a minimum of 5.5 to 6 hours hold in formalin prior to the programmed run was the best for clearing up the problem with fixation. And the point there was basically we were washing out all the fixatives from the bone marrow. So we were going through this whole process, putting it back on the processor and not giving it enough time to rebind and rework. So that seemed to be the problem. This helped the staining and improved the overall handling of the bone marrow. The bone marrow grossing and decal protocol that we currently use are taken as scheduled and placed in AZF for a minimum fixation time of 2 hours. If the core is taken too late and cannot meet the guideline of 4:30 being the deadline, it's held until the next day. What is AZF? We use a 10% neutral buffered formalin with zinc and acetic acid for the first 2 hours of fixation. After the 2-hour minimum fixation of the core is grossed and placed in a labeled cassette, the core is fixed at this point and ready for the next step. The cassettes are then rinsed in running DI water for 15 minutes. Cassettes are drained. Again, which decal, and there it is. It is in decal 2 for 30 minutes at room temperature. This is barely enough to get any of your decal completed, and we have some very crunchy bone marrow. The cores are rinsed again in running water for 15 minutes to remove the decal. At this point, most of the AZF or fixative has been removed or has been washed out and must be replaced with adequate fixation. The cassettes are transferred to 10% neutral buffered formalin to await transfer to the tissue processor, which will also have 10% neutral buffered formalin on it. The cores are loaded on an Excelsior AS tissue processor at 7 p.m. on a delay for the 3.5-hour processing run. Program will end at 5 a.m. or as needed on Saturdays. We get a little flexibility there. We run bone marrows, by the way, Monday through Friday, and we don't get a break on that. Occasionally we even get emergency bone marrows on weekends, which is kind of an interesting concept, but if they want them, we come in and do them. Saturdays we get to come in, instead of 5 a.m., we can come in anytime up to 8 or 9. We only have to worry about, at that point, coming in, taking them off the processor, embedding them, and cutting them, which is a nice thing. So Monday morning we get a little more time to work without them. Complaints about bone marrow sectioning where it was too deep or not deep enough into the core. As different people would cut, we had people who were a little tentative to cut too deeply in the core and people who were a little too aggressive and were practically going through it. We solved it by looking at the thickness of the core and exactly where the pathologist wanted us to begin sectioning. It was easy to figure out as they wanted the center or as near as possible on a 2-millimeter thick core. What we do now is we take 20 revolutions of the microtome wheel or 20 sections at 20 microns, and we're exactly where they want us to begin sectioning. That puts us in a very good position to also leave part of the center of that core for them to be able to do any kappa lambda or special stains they want to do. We've had no problems since then with instituting this procedure. They don't complain. We've occasionally had somebody get a little tentative, but it works well. When the heme pathologists here are happy, we're all happy because we do a lot of work for them and they carry a lot of weight in the institution. So we can't really make them mad too often. Embedding, sectioning, and staining for routine stains. Embedding is done on a diagonal for most core are pieces to allow the following sectioning. We will use 4 slides if the core will not fit in a standard 1-inch square mold. Cores can be in pieces or one long, they can be in multiple pieces or one long core. The pieces tend to be the most difficult to embed and cut as they're generally lumpy and quite often will contain some form of blood clot or a lot of blood around them. We cut at 3 microns for all bone marrow sections except Congo red, which is at 8 microns, and that's when they're really looking for multiple myeloma. They start looking for amyloid in the core. The requirement is now 4 levels on 2 slides. We cut 4 levels at 1 and 10. Slide 1 is level 1 and level 3 for H&E, and slide 2 is levels 2 and 4 for PAS staining. Each level is at 1 and 10 or as close as possible, and we all know some days that can be an issue. The pathologist order IHC and ISH after they have reviewed the cases and the sections are cut by our IHC level, our IHC laboratory with appropriate controls. Occasionally we do cut some. I'm giving you the protocol we're now using on the AS, the Excelsior AS processor from Thermo. We were previously using a Leica ASP300, which was also a very good processor. We just wore it out. This is the protocol we are currently using. We were using a xylene substitute on the Leica in the 9 and 10 positions for xylene with a xylene clearant in the first step. The xylene clearant removed the fat from the bone marrow, and that was necessary. We found we weren't getting quite as much as we needed with the xylene substitute, which was an aliphatic hydrocarbon, a non-aliphatic hydrocarbon, by the way. Since the Excelsior has a different reagent handling procedure, we have changed that to all xylene. The bone marrows are a little crunchier. The tip that using xylene substitute, the non-aliphatic hydrocarbon type, would leave the bone less brittle was from Francis Swain and Gail Callan. And I don't know how to explain it. It does have a slight softening effect, for the lack of a better term. It does not harden the bone as much as xylene. It also works very well on our biopsies, which are routine biopsies also processed with our bone marrow. We are all attempting to produce reproducible bone marrow fixation, decalcification, and processing to allow the best sectioning and staining possible with all the requirements the doctors come up with. When I first came to UAMS and was told we did a maximum of 38 bone marrow cores per day, and we were required to have them cut, stained, and ready for delivery by 6 a.m., I thought everybody here had lost their mind. At that point, we had people coming in at 3 a.m., and I'm sorry, that's obscene. We had some trying times adjusting schedules as we had people starting at 3 a.m. Some of these people were dead on the feet by the time we completed bone marrows and biopsies and started surgical, which was not a good way to run a lab. You want your people to be able to rotate, and we had staggered schedules to do that. But we have now reached a point where we can start at 5 a.m. and we actually don't have to have the bone marrows down until almost 7. It seems no one had ever talked to HemePath doctors and told them we were losing people, and with the stress of having everything out and perfect being the root cause. They listened and are now coming in. We're now coming in at 5 a.m. and we have them ready by 7. It is still stressful. However, we are now able to tell the pathologist when we have processor or personnel issues, usually from illness or vacation, or in our case right at the moment, we're short 4 techs, and everything works out very well. We also now know we can have a dialogue and let them know what our issues are, and they will hear us as long as we approach them very logically about it and have a solution or are willing to listen to what their problems are. I have a group of smears here and cores. They show crust artifacts. Some of them are diluted bone marrow aspirate from the biopsy site with blood contamination. severe cytologic artifacts in the marrow cells, inadequate smears. You'll see them. Also, our main person in heme said avoid using heparin as an anticoagulant for preparing smears due to the artifact it causes. A small amount of EDTA can be used to prevent clotting of the aspirate while preparing the smears. And that's about as much information as they give us. We'll quite often ask them questions about what's happening, and we don't always get full answers, and I'm sure many of you are very familiar with that. We had a problem this week with a shift reagent, not that we had ordered coming in, and the shipment was bad. And we had to sort of dance around and get everything going. We've had some very unhappy people this week working on that. This is just an adequate bone marrow smear and what our people expect to see. On the right, on my right, you can see an adequate blood, kind of a blood smear. You can see all the blood cells, and on the other side, you see more of what looks like the bone marrow or the remnants of a bone marrow smear. This is contaminated blood, contaminated with blood. It's part of a smear from the aspirate, and you can see that the cells look a little strange. They're not well prepared, and it's been contaminated in such a way that there's a lot you're not going to be able to see no matter how you stain it. This was done with I believe they're using a right Giemsa downstairs. We're looking at also perhaps looking at a right Jenner stain on some of our bone marrow to be able to look at some of the blood cells better too. We have been looking at the right Jenner for a while, and we're trying to convince the pathologists that it may be another stain they could look at and use for specimens like this, where they have a better picture of what's going on. This is crush artifact. It usually happens when they're drawing the bone marrow or grossing if it's not well fixed and they mishandle the bone marrow. As you can see, things are out of line where they should be in place, like here and here you have gaps. And that's due to your crush artifact on the right side of the slide, where the bone marrow is separating. Everything is separating out or smooshed together. You can see both things. You can see that where they pull the core, it drags it, or you can see where it's just crushed together and you get just a smoosh of cells. It can also happen from the forceps shoots when you're grossing if you mishandle the tissue. So that can also happen, and we don't gross the tissue in, our gross room does. These are just some slides that one of our heme paths submitted from now on. It's bone marrow biopsies. She's pointing out what an adequate bone marrow smear is and what an inadequate is. And we actually, the slide on the right that's not adequate, we actually get more than I would like to see for what we're doing of the very crushed or very broken up bone marrow. And that's from the cores, and that may be due to the treatment the patient has, the way the bone core was drawn, or it may be from another cause. But some of the medication some of our patients are on for multiple myeloma and even leukemia can also cause the bone to fragment, or the bone marrow core to fragment as it comes out. There's not enough material there to hold it together. So that's another issue. You see an aspiration of a bone marrow from a bone marrow core that was very good, and the doctor that I work with put the second slide in and told me she put it in to be funny, but that's what a fold looks like on a bad bone marrow. Occasionally she likes to pull to jerk her chain a little bit and send a picture up and say, this was a bad bone marrow, and it was fine until I got around to telling her, you have to quit sending me the same picture. And she just laughed and said, well, we have to keep you awake. And we do have days when the bone marrow cores fold up. This, again, is crush artifact. Again, you can see the bone marrow core has been crushed together and is not looking very good. You would want it to be more extended and have a clearer picture of the center of it where you see the hematoxylin staining. Unfortunately, when this happens, if it happens while they're drawing the bone marrow core, there's not much we can do about it. We just have to cut it and then try to figure out how to make it look as good as we can for the docs. And sometimes this is the best we can do. she added this as just the way we measure bone marrow cores, and this is another example of crush artifacts with multiple pieces where the bone marrow just literally fell apart as it was being removed. In the process, I had either been expressed from the needle too quickly or drawn too quickly. We're not real sure what causes it. It depends on who you're talking to as to whether they say it was expressed too quickly or drawn too quickly. It doesn't really matter to us. The bottom line is it looks terrible. This is what I meant by we get several of these. When we have 38 in a day, it's not unusual to have 2 or 3 or even 4 like this. This is an example, again, of multiple pieces of a bone marrow core, but it actually did look pretty good, all things considered. We were very happy with it. They didn't call us and complain, and they do understand if the core fell apart. If it was a good core and it fell apart afterwards, they're not too upset. And we do process in a biopsy cassette, and occasionally we will have a core break while it's in the cassette too. They can be difficult to cut, difficult to embed because you want to lay them in such a way that when you're cutting them, you don't have them piled on top of each other, and you have enough separation that you can actually see the pieces were separated, and it's much easier for the doctor to work with. Again, this is an aspiration of a bone marrow core. It's just an example of a good one with a longer piece or a small lower magnification and a higher magnification of the same piece. And that is pretty much what ours look like for H&E. Again, we're showing aspiration artifact, which is interstitial hemorrhage, and you can see all the red blood cells in the tissue, which is not really a lot of fun because when you have that much blood clot in it, sometimes you have to go back, and what we do here is we keep very cold ice-soaked gauze in our water bath, and rather than taking the bone marrow core out of the microtome and putting it back on water to soak, we will place the very cold, slightly damp gauze against it and let it sit there for about 5 to 10 seconds, and then go ahead and go back in and cut our section. We found it was just too difficult sometimes, even though the same microtome, nothing ever goes back in exactly the way it was. So that was a problem.
Our featured product for this month is our TissueTech VIP6, the most reliable and safe dimensional tissue processor on the market, providing safe, high-quality batch tissue processing. Our mean time between repairs, which means uptime for you guys, is over 52 weeks.
My email address here is pamarcum@uams.edu. Thank you very much for listening in.